Good evening, this is Viewpoint. I'm Zakka. Jacob. Former Supreme Court Judge Indu Malhotra has rekindled a very important debate. Should temples be controlled by state governments, or should it be left to individual patrons and temple management committees to run the affairs of individual temples across the country? Now, some of the biggest temples in the country, from Tirupati to Sabarimala to Vaishno Devi, they are all controlled either directly or indirectly, certainly, through management committees, through state governments who have representatives on that management committee. Now, a good chunk of the earnings that these temples make go to the state coffers as well. Now, the state's case is that it is this money which then pays for the upkeep of not just the popular temples, but tens of thousands of not so popular temples across various states. Is there a case to be made to free up temples from state control, or is this a fallacious debate, as many politicians, whether they are from left-leaning parties or right-leaning parties, seem to indicate? But first, the story of how retired Justice Indu Malhotra rekindled this very important debate.
That's what happens with these communist governments. They want to just take over because of the revenue.
Former Supreme Court Judge Justice Indu Malhotra sparking a storm.
How can you exclude them?
Speaking outside the Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple in Thiruvananthapuram, she appears to have alluded to the 2020 Supreme Court verdict. She and current Chief Justice of India, Justice UU Lalit, were both part of the bench that upheld the rights of the Travancore royal family to manage the temple.
That's what happens with these communist governments. They want to just take over because of the revenue. Their problem is the revenue. All over they've taken over. All over. Only Hindu temples. So Justice Lalit and I said, no, we'll not allow it.
They had set aside a Kerala High Court ruling that allowed the state government to take control of Padmanabhaswamy Temple. The High Court had held that the ruler of Travancore, who was trusted to manage the temple, was the last king of Travancore, Sri Chittira Tirunal Balarama Varma. But the High Court said after Varma died in 1991, the state should be considered the ruler of Travancore. But the SC bench affirmed the mandate of the erstwhile ruling family of Travancore to continue its involvement in the management of the temple.
It is not the policy of the communists to took over the temple to capture its income or utilize its income. And communists wants to protect the temples and to protect the believers. And if any temple is took over by communists, it goes to the administration under the Devaswam board.
The Sri Padmanabhaswamy Temple is considered to be one of the richest temples in the country, with valuables worth around 1 lakh crores in its chambers. But despite that, the temple faced a financial crunch and the state government had to bail it out with soft loans. So should temples be under state control, or should they be freed?
All right, before we go to our guests, I want to bring you up to speed with some of the wealthiest temples in India which happen to be under state control, either directly through these various boards and departments, the HRNCE departments, or indirectly through temple management committees. First, of course, the Tirupati Tirumala Devasthanam, which is the biggest temple in terms of revenue in the country. It gets annual earnings to the tune of 3,000 crores as of 21-22. The Tirupati temple is managed by the Board of Trustees. Ultimately, it is controlled by the state of Andhra Pradesh, the state government of Andhra Pradesh. It had revenues in excess of 3,000 crores. A good chunk of it, almost a quarter of it, goes to the state's kitty. In Kerala, the Sabarimala temple, it has an annual revenue as of 2021-22, annual revenue of 150 crores. It is managed by the Travancore Devaswam board, which is in fact a state government entity. There's also a Devaswam minister who's a minister in the government of Kerala, and ultimately the control of that board and eventually through the board of the temple is with the Kerala government. The Shirdi Sai Baba temple in Shirdi in Maharashtra, again one of the most popular temples in the country. It had earnings in 21-22 of 600 crore rupees from its devotees. It is managed by a board of trustees. who ultimately are answerable to the Maharashtra state government. In fact, the Maharashtra state government has a bunch of representatives, its own chosen people, on the board of trustees of the Shirdi Sai Baba temple. And of course, Vaishno Devi temple in Jammu, total revenues it had in 21-22 was 500 crore rupees. Again, this temple too is managed by the Shrine Board, and it is ultimately controlled by the local administration of Jammu and Kashmir, the Union Territory, which of course comes under the Lieutenant Governor. So clearly, all of these temples with thousands of crores in earnings are being managed, like I said, either directly through these boards or through temple management committees indirectly, and ultimately the control is with state government. So is there a case to be made to free these temples from state control? Dushyant Sridhar is a Vedic speaker and writer. He's joining us on the broadcast this evening. Vivek Srivastav, political analyst and left-leaning commentator. Sumansi Raman is a political analyst joining us. And KJ Alphonse is a leader of the BJP and former union minister. Let me start with Vivek Srivastav. The case that was made by Justice Indu Malhotra, specifically with regard to the Padmanabh Swami temple, was here was a temple which was one of the richest in the country in terms of assets it owned. Why should the state government of Kerala, whether it is CPM state government or any party that is running the state government, why should they get a share in the proceeds or the earnings that devotees give to the temple? They're not giving it to the state.
Yeah, see, first of all, it is not just the question of the communists. And you just took the name of Vaishno Devi Shrine. And let me tell you that when Jagmohan Ji was the Lieutenant Governor of J&K at that time, that was the time when he noticed that there were a lot of malfunctionings that were taking place financially and management and otherwise in the shrine. And it was he who somehow facilitated that a board properly be made, and the funds should also be regulated and management should be done. So it is not just a question of the communists. When the state government controls religious organizations, especially the temples, there are two benefits. Number one, the misuse of the funds does not take place. It doesn't go into the pockets of the priests, and it is not used by personal families, which has been happening in this country for centuries. Because devotees are actually devoting the money for the upkeep of the temple and for welfare activities.
No, but Mr. Srivastav, can I ask one question? The devotee is giving the money to his or her favorite god or goddess to that temple. They are not giving the money to the state. They're already paying money to the state through form of taxes. Why should the state get a share of the money that the devotee is giving to the temple?
The state does not want to take up that money, and the state, ultimately, there is no personal person. The state is the government, and the government belongs to the people. Funds are being taken basically to regulate the functioning. And secondly, there are many other decisions. It is not just about money. For example, if you take Akshardham temple has got branches. There is a temple in Gujarat. Then there came a temple came up in Delhi. There could be a temple coming up somewhere else also. Funds are being channelized. So who regulates? Who decides where to spend, what to spend? So there are many other decisions.
Anyway, should it be the job of the state to regulate? But anyway, let me ask KJ Alphonse. The case being made by the likes of Vivek Srivastav is that there have been multiple instances where these temple management committees or management committees of various shrines, corruption has been found. People were using it for their own personal aggrandizement. There was no oversight. He says ultimately, in a democratic setup like India, why should a royal family or classes and structures that we had pre-independence, why should exclusively one family or two family or a bunch of individuals run popular shrines? It should be left to the state, because ultimately the people choose the state.
Zakka, I don't agree with this argument at all. I believe that religion is something which is personal. It is a question of a personal belief. It must be managed by the devotees. In fact, it's surprising Indu Malhotra has referred specifically to the communists. Karl Marx said religion is the opium of the people. They are atheists. How can atheists control management of the temple? It's a contradiction in ideology itself. So I think it's completely, if you take the Marxists, I think it's completely a contradiction to have temple management, and therefore I think it's completely out. And secondly, I believe that management of all temples across the country, it should be left to the devotees. If you bring the same argument that there is corruption and therefore let the state take over. Isn't the state much more corrupt generally than any of these bodies? Take for example the Christian church. I'm a Christian. So why shouldn't the state take over also management of Christian churches? Because apparently there is corruption in some places, though it may not be very large scale. So you can use the same argument to take over Christian churches, Muslim mosques, and all Sikh religious places. So you can use the same argument saying there is a chance of misappropriation. I really believe it's best to leave the management and administration of temples and all religious places to the believers and their bodies.
I think this argument of an egalitarian approach, you can't have, Suman C. Raman, let me ask you that. No state in India, whether it's state government, central government, no state authority would dare run management committees of mosques or of churches. So if that's the case for the Muslim community and the Christian community, why should state then, either through these boards or through management committees, run some of the most popular and most revered temples in this country? It's a question of double standard. That's the question that's being asked.
Zakka, first of all, there is a very strong case to free temples from government control. In many states, and in the state where I come from, the temples have been systematically looted by corrupt government employees for the better part of 50, 60 years particularly. Lakhs of acres of land have been allowed, and the Madras High Court actually called it the active-passive role, and they accused the HRNC government department of actually colluding with land grabbers to drastically reduce the extent of holdings of temple lands. So there has been a systematic loot, and I'm sure that this is the same case across states. So the fact remains that there is massive corruption. The state, in many states, they take away almost 20%, 15% of the administrative fees, then audit fees and so on, and they take away officially 20-25% of the revenues of the temples. So the point is, there is a case. The problem comes when you do not have a body or an organization that can step in and guarantee a transparent and honest administration for these temples. You may be actually moving from frying pan to fire if you actually take away the control without knowing to whom these temples are going to be handed over, what is going to be the supervisory mechanism, how are we going to ensure that transparency comes in, and so on. So the case that the government is running temples into the ground, that is a very strong case. There is massive corruption. I don't think anybody on this panel is actually going to dispute that. The point is, should the cure be worse than the disease? And how do we ensure that the cure is actually better? And how do we ensure which organizations take over these temples? How do we ensure that there is a transparent mechanism for the administration? That is where the problem lies.
Dushyant Sridhar, one of the arguments is being put forth by politicians or by state governments which are in the business of managing these temples, either directly or indirectly, is, let's say, for example, in the state of Kerala, you may have a handful of temples which are popular, a Shabarimala, a Guruvayur temple, maybe a Padmanabha Swami temple, where a bulk of the earnings are concentrated in these 3-4 temples. But there could be thousands of other temples which do not generate those kind of revenues, whose upkeep ultimately is managed through these Devasam boards. If it is left to individual temples, the ones that are prosperous and rich and get a lot of earnings from the devotees, they'll be fine. But what about the tens of thousands of other temples who do not have the means to raise those kind of revenues? Who takes care of them then?
Good evening, Zakka. Namaskaram. This is the first time I'm talking to you. And Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav wishes to all of us. But I just hope that we can wish that temples also one day Azadi. Coming to the very point, the statement made by the distinguished individual today was about communist government. Let us not give color to any government, especially communism has something very, very unique, because there was a statement made by Nikolai Bukharin who said communism is incompatible with religious faith. So especially when a communist government says that we are going to upkeep the temples, it is an oxymoron in itself. Now, coming to the statement or the case that the rich temples will just let go of the not so well performing temples, well, if you don't trust your own citizens, the Hindus who can very well form a group and manage the temple, isn't it a trust deficit? So the very case that only if the government manages the temple very well puts the corollary that, oh, the citizens, we don't trust in the Hindu citizens, they cannot manage the temples. If the Hindu citizens, along with the Muslim and the brother citizens of the country, have gotten independence for the country, they can very well manage the temples. The second layer of problems, Zakka, which we fail to notice is one, the government says we are going to manage the temples at a level where the administration is concerned. The second layer gets to the agama practice, the religious practices of the temple. The moment the government comes with its full force into a temple stating that we will manage the administration of the temple, next it will start interfering into the agama practices. So very well the government will have a clear say on the religion too, which is not the duty of a secular government, whatever the word secular means. So ideally, if the question asked by you is, if the rich temples will not take care of the not so good temples or not so well performing temples, I'm sure the honest Hindu citizens of this country can get together and very well keep up the temples. The government doesn't have to worry so much and put this migration.
Since you brought up the agama question, and this was a question that came up before the courts also very recently, I think in the last few days, specifically in the context of the state of Tamil Nadu, where the court basically ruled that in those temples which follow agama practices, then it was a question of appointment of archakas or appointment of pujaris. Basically, in those temples that follow the agama rituals or practices, yes, you go by whoever the temple authorities or the practice has been or the tradition has been, you appoint them as archakas. But in the non-agama temples, the state is free to appoint whoever you choose to appoint. The state's argument in that case was that if you're going to appoint people only from a certain community or a certain background, then that's a discriminatory practice. So how do you respond to that then?
Then in that case, I agree with that point of social discrimination that may happen. But to say the least, in Tamil Nadu, especially in a state like Tamil Nadu, which has the highest number of temples, there are over 80% of the temples which are managed by not the Brahmin community. Only 15 or 20% of the temples are managed by the Brahmin community. Well, if the case is the social discrimination may happen, then in that case, I'm sorry to say this, I do not want to pull in other religions at all. I have equal respect for other religions. But the question is, then why shouldn't it oppose if a woman is not a state head or the church head? Then they should oppose there as well. That's a gender discrimination there, right? Mm-hmm. So if the question is of social discrimination and so the archaka's appointment is a big question, then you should be questioning the churches and the mosques. Some of the mosques, I understand that women are not allowed. And in churches, the women can never become the pope head or something. So in that case, you should be questioning them also.
Okay, Vivek Srivastav, respond to that.
See, Zakka,
in your case, for example,
the moment the government says,
your government went to the Supreme Court, no less, challenging the practice of not allowing women of a certain age in Shabarimala. That matter is still pending before a higher bench of the Supreme Court. The point that's being made by KJ Alphonse and Dushyant Sridhar is, particularly in the case of a communist government, and I guess this would apply to parties like the DMK, why should they be running temples, or why should they be in the business of managing these temples?
You see, it's all about, Brahminical supremacy. Either you believe in Brahminical supremacy or you believe in the... And for centuries, we know that Brahminical supremacy has been a bane for the Hindu society. Discriminations have happened, caste discriminations have happened, atrocities have happened, and the temples have also been fully involved into it. Are we not aware of it? If it was not for the duly elected government after 1947 and social reformers like Brahmo Samaj, I mean, do you feel that the situation would not have improved? Secondly, Mr. Suman C. Raman was talking about the corruption done by government. At least the government of India can be questioned, vigilance inquiries can be set up, and if somebody is corrupt and misusing the funds as a government representative in a board, you can at least catch hold of him. If Delhi police is corrupt, at least I can act. I don't have to privatize the Delhi police. So
no, but you can have that oversight for private management, temple management committees as well. You don't necessarily need a government representative for oversight there.
that if they are not under the preview of the government and the government laws, it is very difficult to manage it up. That has been the experience. Secondly, it is also very necessary for the government to intervene because there has been a history of caste atrocities that have happened over centuries, many other mismanagements. So nobody is eating up the funds.
But
If
Mr.
you want to
Srivastava,
create-
let's leave the discrimination part aside. That's a different debate altogether. I'm asking you purely from a revenue question. If
Yes,
let's say the
yes.
temple of Sabrimala is making 100 crores a year, why should it mandatorily have to give a quarter of its earnings to the government?
It should. Why should it not? People are devoting the money to it. The money is going to be taken up by the state government. It is going to be used for the welfare of the temples, for the Hindu religion itself. Unless you believe that we should have Asarams and Ram Rahims who keep on collecting donations, making their own organizations and ashrams, and pocketing it up for themselves and their families.
Okay, so Raman, how do you respond to that? If it's left to private individuals, then you'll start having the cult of god men and god women, and the biggest temples, the most popular temples, will be run by these the cult of god men and god women. Whereas in the case of the state, at least as Vivek Srivastava says, A, there is a sense of egalitarianism about it because the state can't be seen as discriminating, and two, more importantly, you for whatever it's worth, you can haul up a public official either in a court of law or go to a police station. There is some degree of oversight of a public official.
Zakka, this is exactly the issue, which is a very valid point. I've raised this issue with Dr. Subramaniam Swamy also on a debate in the past. Look, he has gone to court multiple times on this particular issue. And the point is very clear. Hindu society needs to come up with a plan. In the absence of a plan, merely saying hand it over, I think it's very naive to say that, all those, first of all, there will be any number of takers for temples which have got a large amount of revenue. How many takers are there going to be? For instance, in Tamil Nadu, there are 44,000 temples.
Yeah.
And at least 30,000 of them simply are temples that have very, very little revenue and are struggling to, even carry out the daily pujas. So there will be hardly any takers for them. They will all gravitate towards the temples which have huge amount of revenue. So without Hindu society putting in place a concrete plan, we are, simply saying government should hand it over, government should hand it over. To me, that does not seem like a valid solution at all. Yes,
Okay.
long term, the government running temples, when they are not running places of worship of other religions, is simply wrong. There is no doubt about it. But it is incumbent on the seers, the mutts, the organizations of Hindu society to put together a comprehensive plan, to go to the government and say, look, this is how we intend to run the temples. We will permit the government to carry out an external audit on a periodic basis. We agree to abide by a certain set of rules and then ask for the temples to be handed over.
KJ Alphonse,
hand over
specifically in the case of the Padmanabha Swami temple in Thiruvananthapuram, which is the case that Justice Malhotra was also referring to, the Kerala High Court, which had earlier ruled on it, basically said, how can you have the assets and the earnings coming from a public place of worship go to one ruling family when the very idea of kings and monarchs and so on ceased to exist post-independence? India is today a democracy. It's a rule by the people, for the people, of the people. Let the people decide who gets to part with this revenue source. And also the argument that's being put forth by the state government there, and you heard, I think, K.K. Shailaja saying, why did the royal family need a stipend from the government if they could manage the affairs of the temple? The state government has had to bail them out on multiple occasions, if I'm not mistaken. Mr. Alphonse. Mr. KJ Alphonse, can you hear me, sir? Okay, I think we've lost the audio with him. But Dushyant, you want to take that, and that'll be the final comment on the show.
Yeah. So the very question, initially there was a point made till 1991, the kings were existing, and then the government said we will take control. Just for the information of the viewers of this channel, all the kings who belonged to the Travancore dynasty called themselves Padmanabha Dasa, the servant of Lord Padmanabha. No government says that. So if you say that I will take over, have the same motive and the vision in you that you are the servants of the Lord. If you say that the religion is distinct from me, you have no right to take over the temple. Second point, there was an irrelevant point made about some Rahims and Asaram Bapus. Well, they exist in every religion. They are not particular only to the Hindu religion. So if at all you want to be fair, impartial, do it for the other religions where there is gender discrimination. Third point, coming to the management, yes, of course, Suman C. Raman said we should have a body and a committee made. If at all, this very question, Zakka, of freeing temples comes because there is mismanagement in the temples in which the government manages. That is why this question is coming. If everything is hunky-dory, then why will the Hindus go to the court and say, give the temples to us? So when you have been treating the temples in not so a fair manner for 50 years or 60 years, it is high time that you say this is a failed case scenario and give it back to the Hindus, trust your citizens and give it back to them.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it at that. I want to thank all our guests. Unfortunately, we lost that link with KJ Alphonse, but I want to thank all the guests who joined us on this broadcast. Clearly, there is a case to be made for temples to be freed, as has been argued by the likes of Dr. Subramaniam Swamy. But then the state's case has been that when it comes to a certain degree of equality, equanimity, and of course egalitarianism, in a democratic setup like India, you cannot trust any other institution other than the state to take care of not the temples that have the money or the resources, but the ones that do not have that. And they are, of course, much more in count than the ones who can take care of themselves. Now, I'm getting a piece of breaking news which I need to move to. NASA has just announced that its historic Artemis 1 mission, which is to the moon, has been postponed once again because of an issue with one of the engines. We're not sure exactly which of the engines and what exactly the technical snag is. But the next available time slot for this launch could be Friday. But the engineers still need to figure out what this particular issue is and to address it and to troubleshoot the problem that has developed in the engine. Let me go across to Abhishek Jha, my colleague, who is joining us on the phone right now. Abhishek, any more details from what NASA has said as to what exactly was the malfunction of this engine? And are they hopeful that they will be able to go through with this launch on the next available date?
So, Zakka, not exactly. They have not come out with any detailed briefing on the technical glitch that has stopped NASA's this ambitious mission of Artemis. However, initially when this mission was already planned, 2 backup dates were also scheduled, which in case of failure on first date, they would be used. So the next available date is on Friday, and if it does not happen on Friday, then also they will have probably 5th of September is also one of the options that they can use. Meanwhile, this has been a very ambitious mission of NASA, and they probably had this, and so they had put 3 dates as a backup also. And more like we are waiting for some detailed briefing as to which engine or what part did malfunction, and this mission had to be halted for the
What
moment.
exactly is the scope of Artemis 1? We've had moon missions in the past as well, both unmanned and manned. What exactly was Artemis 1's remit? What was it going to do on the moon? What was the scope of study there?
So it has been almost 50 years since the last man set foot on Mars, and after that, this whole mission to Mars, mission to Moon, in fact, were put on hold because of the financial reason. But since last 6-8 years, there has been this buzz around the Moon landing, and to gauge the latest technical advancement that the NASA and has been able to bring on that table, this new Artemis has been designed in that way so that it will be able to take humans also in later on mission to Moon. And Artemis has been initially when the men were sent, the astronauts were sent to Moon, it was on through Apollo mission. So now this Artemis mission, it would have actually enabled NASA to send astronauts once again on Moon's soil. And this was this mission was not a manned mission, but it was in a precursory way. It would have given some key information regarding as to what should be the later development, so that astronauts can also be sent on Moon.
All right, Abhishek, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how the story plays out. NASA has unfortunately had to put off its moon mission launch of Artemis 1. The next available window happens to be on Friday. As of now, all that NASA has said is that there was a technical malfunction in one of the engines. We're not sure what the nature of that malfunction is or how long it would take for them to address that issue. There are massive protests in Ranchi over the death of Ankita, who was set on fire by a neighbor of hers. That person has been arrested along with 2 of his accomplices. But there are massive protests that have been going on in Ranchi. People are saying that the fact that she was not given timely treatment, timely medical treatment, timely medical intervention, that is what led to her death, her unfortunate demise. Let me go across to Saurav. Saurav, so there seems to be a lot of genuine anger there amongst the people. So politics can't be too far behind. I'm given to understand that organizations like the BJP, the VHP, etc., have also waded into this unfortunate death, this tragic death of Ankita.
Yes, Zakka. Early in the morning, we saw the tweets. Series of tweets came from various top brass leaders of BJP, whether it was Arjun Munda, Babulal Soren, and Raghuvar Das. They all tweeted and asked the Hemant government to step down because of the law and order situation that is getting worse in the state. And they also demanded 1 crore compensation for the family of the Ankita, and also a government job for a family member. So these all are the demands of the BJP leaders. Now at evening, the various Hindu organizations have started protesting on the streets of Ranchi. Just a while back, effigy of Shahrukh, the main accused, was burnt, and several slogans were, witnessed where they are demanding the death penalty of Shahrukh, the main accused, as soon as possible. They want a fast-track court to be set up so that speedy trial should be done. For that, they are demanding the death penalty of Shahrukh, the main accused, as soon as possible. Also, VHP, Bajrang Dal, and other organizations, they all have joined and they are protesting on the streets of Ranchi.
All right, Saurav, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays out there on the streets of Ranchi and beyond.